Greetings and welcome back. So, we're in the midst of trying to talk our way through what I'm calling the facts of evolution. I mean, the very existence of evolution is what you might call the abiding fact of evolution, the fact that animals over time, organisms over time, plants over time, microbes over time, that they change. That's a fact. But within that, there are various ingredients to evolution. We've already talked about variation as being an ingredient. We talked about the necessity that variation be heritable, and now I want to give my third piece of this, which is the fact of selection, and so we'll illustrate that through a couple of case studies, just like we've done in the previous examples. So I already mentioned this earlier, but I do want to note that there are many forces of evolution. And when I say force, I mean things that change the allele frequencies in a population. Selection is probably the most well known, the most popular, but there are others, such as drift, which I'll talk about in the next vignette. So, the issue of selection and the factual nature of selection is really interesting. I mean, I don't know if you have looked at Darwin's On the Origin of Species, but the very first chapter, the book opens on the subject of domestication. And domestication is an example of artificial selection. Darwin wrote many books in his career. You can see on the right that he wrote this book, The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication, and that really had to do with his observations about the way that organisms could be sculpted over time with the visible hand of selection. In other words, in natural evolution out of the world, in the absence of human intervention, I'm going to call that natural selection, and there's just an invisible hand. In the case of artificial selection, for example, the famous experiment done in Russia with respect to trying to domesticate foxes, there the hand is visible, and the criterion that was used there was basically friendliness towards humans. It was nothing more, nothing less. In other words, each generation, they would look at the foxes and they'd find out which ones snarled and which ones didn't, and the ones that snarled would not be used for further breeding, and the ones that didn't would be used for further breeding. That's an example of artificial selection. So I also mentioned earlier in my own introduction to what evolution is to me, the idea that one of the most important topics in all of evolution is the human experiment. And, artificial selection is an example of this. So just as a reminder, I told you already that Darwin was quite a pigeon fancier. And the concept here is that, you look at pigeons and here you see on the left that a selection was made artificially by a human with eyes choosing for a lighter color, and in each generation the lightest ones are chosen to be given the right to breed, and over time, over a short number of generations, I want to say, what one will have is a new animal. This has certainly been used to great advantage in the context of our crops, and there are many such examples, and there are many places for you to read about this, but the origins of corn, tomatoes, sunflowers, rice, all super interesting. And I love the fact that archaeologists have had a window onto this. In other words, we actually can learn things at the level of DNA, but we can also learn things by looking at the fossil record or the archaeological record. And there's a particular experiment that's been going on, it's probably still going on if I remember correctly, at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, where what they did is they selected for oil content. And what you see here is a plot over time of the results of this long-term selection experiment, where what's plotted on the y-axis is percent oil content, and the x-axis is the time. And concomitantly, they also selected for low oil content, and that also has illustrated the visible hand of artificial selection. I think I won't touch on that. I just wanted to mention my friend, Hopi Hoekstra. She's a professor at Harvard, someone that I admire immensely, because I love many things about the way that she conducts science, but I love the fact that there's this beautiful and interesting interplay between the natural world, going out and trying to actually see what goes on in the world writ large, and then really clever things going on in the lab as well. So one of the kinds of problems that she's thought about has to do with pigmentation, and the way that pigmentation plays into the question of avoiding predation. So here, you can see some different kinds of environments. There's beach mice and there's mice that live in forests. They have different colors, and there's kind of a really interesting long-term record of this. And I think I hopefully will have a chance to come back to this later. But the idea is that there might be some sort of a benefit to this kind of pigmentation that could lead to selection. So Kaufman in 1974 did this experiment where basically he had mice and literally at nighttime examined how subject to predation they were by an owl. And you can see, on the left-hand side, you see that the light mouse was captured by 20 percentage points more often than the dark mouse, and so on and so forth. And I guess that's kind of a classic example. In Hopi's case, with her postdoc, I think Sasha, what they did is, first of all, I love the fact that she imagined this perfect experiment, which she releases the different colored mice into habitats and follows their life history explicitly. But short of being able to do that, what they did is they actually made plastic mice that they painted, and then they put them in these various environments, and then they were able to have records. They could actually see which one of the mice were attacked, and you can see in the graph at the bottom, interestingly, proportion of attacks on the light-colored background. The light mice are attacked, like plastic mice are attacked much less frequently, and then the inverse in the dark environment. And not only that, but they can actually say something about who the predator was based on whether or not there were, talon marks or teeth marks or this kind of thing. So that's my little vignette. I mean, I showed you this earlier, but let's
just demand
just remind
that
us.
Educators around America teach evolution not as fact, but as theory.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess it feels kind of pompous for me to claim that I'm an educator, but at any rate, here I am talking about evolution, and what I hope that I've accomplished is given you a sense of the various ingredients into evolution. What I want to do in this next vignette is to talk explicitly about the various forces of evolution, one of which is the selection which we just talked about.